Well met, everyone. I am Rich the Lich. I want to talk a little bit about planes, planar travel, other worlds, other places outside of the material plane within your D&D space. Whether you're talking Forgotten Realms and you have the tried and true and familiar planes, the Abyss, the Nine Hells, the Feywild, the Shadowfell, and so on, or perhaps it's something a little more interesting, maybe a campaign setting or world that's almost more focused on other planes, such as like a planescape where you have Sigil, kind of the center where you can navigate and travel everywhere else. So first off, this video is always going to be sponsored by coffee. The catalyst, sort of the launch point for me to create this video, is a new release that's coming out somewhere in September. I'll get the book, of course. I'll do a spotlight on it, of course. This is an official D&D book that's recently been released as of yesterday, I think. It's a book. I'll show it on screen right here. It's a book that's going to be taking us in 5th edition D&D to the Feywild. I don't know a lot about it, of course. It was just recently sort of teased, and there's a trailer for it and whatnot. I don't know if it's a source book or if it's an adventure. I think it is an adventure, sort of like a Curse of Strahd or a Rime of the Frost Maiden, taking place in the Feywild. And I thought I would just make a quick blurby video rambling to you, talking head style, of just giving you some thoughts and things to think through on whether you should use the planes in your world. Maybe how have I done it? How have I used the planes in my campaign settings? From the DM perspective, of course. Okay, so here's just some things to perhaps think through in asking the question of yourself and of your group whether other planar travel, other worlds is a good fit for your game. If it's a good fit for your story arc. Should it be something that you invest a lot of time into in your world building when you're making your own world? I know that I am creating, as you probably know, I've mentioned it in many videos, I'm currently finishing up my Silberat world book, which is a new campaign setting for 5th edition D&D, and there are portals and ways, whether it's just gate or high-level wizard spells or physical structures in my world that will allow you to travel to other planes, to the Feywild, to the Shadowfell, and so on. And as I'm churning through my thought process of how much do I invest into these worlds, I'm not trying to create a planescape, a sigil, where sort of one of the selling points is this otherworldly travel. But here's just some thoughts, some sort of bullet points, if you will, that you might be able to think through as a dungeon master, but also as players, if you want to come to your table and offer this to your DM, as to when is it a good fit to travel to other worlds. Yes, I know we have this new official D&D book coming out pretty soon here in September, and I don't know a lot about it. That may be sort of a self-contained thing, where if you want to play in the Feywild, that book is going to take care of you, right? And if you want to just be inspired by it and use snippets from that in your own world, I'm sure the book is going to offer us some new monsters, some new NPCs, some new player options, perhaps, that are sort of Feywild themed and whatnot, okay? So here's just some things to think through. Number one, if you were going to include or create your own plane that is sort of an offshoot accessible via your material world, your material plane, how much detail do you put into that? As I'm writing my own Silberat world book, when I get into the planes section and the fact that they are accessible and they are a thing, it's not an entire chapter in its own right because I don't want that to be the focus of my world. I want the world of Silberat, sort of the main continent, that material plane, if you will, to be the focus. But how much detail do you put? Because if you don't put a lot of detail and you have just a paragraph on here's what the plane of ice is in my world. Now, you have a lot to pull from, a lot of lore, right? You can Google the Abyss. You can Google the Nine Hells. And you can get into mythology, real-world mythology stuff to sort of inform the level of detail and the scope. But you can look at how is the Abyss handled in Forgotten Realms. Those characters that have written stories, those NPCs, Elminster maybe, something like this, right? Traveling through the plains. What's his perception of what the Feywild, of what the Shadowfell, of what the Nine Hells and the Abyss look like? Yes, you can always say, well, I know there's demons and devils there, but is it inhospitable terrain? What are the laws of gravity? What are the physics like? How does magic work? What is time? Can you get back? What are the enemies you run into? Is it someplace that is forbidden for player characters because they environmentally don't have the ability to withstand the environment that's there? But maybe you're still using the Abyss and the Nine Hells in your own world, but you're saying that it's an actual place that people can kind of come in and out from. Maybe all you need is resist fire gear and you can stand in that area. Maybe the Nine Hells and the Abyss in your world is inside of an entire volcano, in which case that's a no-go zone. The only thing that comes out, only things come out of there, nothing goes in, right? So how much detail do you put into it? If you only put a paragraph, that plane, that world is only going to offer you a quick snippet of gameplay. It might only offer you one night of gameplay, and that's it because you don't have a lot. Or if you're not a veteran DM and you don't put a lot of detail into it, you're going to have to really wing things and kind of come up with things on the fly. You know, when a player asks, can I fly in this plane? Well, have you thought through the gravity? Can a druid cast something like a control weather? Is there even lightning in this plane? How does lightning affect the plane of water? Do you need water breathing in the plane of water? Or is the plane of water just a vast, world of mostly oceans, but there's still, you know what I mean? Is there actual ground for PCs to stand on? How do survival checks work? Can you track in this place? Are you just sort of astral plane-esque and just floating through space? Excuse me. So those details you need to come up with. But also, if you go the other way and you put an exhaustive amount of detail and you're creating pages and pages and little mini documents on the plane of ice in my world, this is how it plays out in my cosmos. Are you now putting so much detail that becomes the attraction and your players don't even want to play in your normal world anymore, right? Like imagine Forgotten Realms puts 290 pages on the Feywild only. You may want to invest into the Feywild and not even be in Forgotten Realms. You don't want to have anything to do with the Sword Coast and Waterdeep and Myth Draenor and Cormyr and all these other things, and all you want to do is spend your time there, right? That's something like a Planescape, right? Where traveling through the worlds and the planes is sort of the central theme to that cosmos, to that world. So how much detail do you put? That's a bullet point you really want to think through. Here's another reason why you might want to include other worlds in the planes in your game space, in your setting. It allows for new mechanics. You can use the planes as an opportunity to try out some new things, some new house rules that you may want to start to incorporate. And these are actual crunchy bits, actual mechanics, like flying doesn't work here. Tell anything with the teleportation aspect, Misty Step, obviously gate, teleportation circle, teleport. None of those things work. Dimension door, they don't work in this plane. But it's a way that you can kind of try out without a lot of... The planes offer sort of a hand wave effect, right? Of you have a player that's unwieldy in your party. They have Misty Step, they have I gave one of my players in my group a shield that allowed Dimension Door, right? But you've got a player that's using these various features to really good effect to the point where they're becoming a little overpowered for you. Have your players take a little jaunt into this new world and create some mechanics that kind of stifle that. Yes, I know you're targeting that player, but the point is, new worlds, planes, otherworldly travel, they offer you a chance to change up the rules, to sort of be a testing ground. So that's one advantageous thing of using these other worlds, because it now makes sort of the fact of it not making sense to the core rules of your system and your world makes sense because you're not in Kansas anymore, right? You're in a different world. So if all fire spells don't function as fire spells in this plane, it kind of makes sense because it's your own Gubliok plane and it has its own laws of physics. So it's a way that you can violate the laws, the mechanics of the game, and sort of test some things out to see maybe what's powerful, what's not powerful. Maybe it's ways that you can trickle that into the real world to start incorporating these elements about how all healing is reduced by half in this plane. That makes sense when you're creating your own world. But what happens is in your new world, right? Once your players leave that plane, and they find there's these little sort of like wild magic pockets. There's these little bursts of necrotic energy. Just, And in 100-mile radius from that little pocket, that little veil that's pierced between your world and that weird healing world, all healing spells are reduced by half. So every time you have a combat in your real world, and they're fighting against orcs or goblins or, things that deal punishing amounts of damage, and your clerics and your healers and your druid are only healing to half. That's it. All heal spells are reduced by half, 50%. And they look and they say, oh, there's a weird black orb thing floating in the corner up there. We need to somehow get rid of that because this fight's going to be ridiculous because our heals suck here. But you've brought in that element because your players went into that new world and you've introduced that new mechanic, which now becomes sort of a house rule for you. You see what I mean? You see how that kind of works through? So it's really interesting to use that. Okay. Another one. Bored with the current world. Maybe you have invested a lot of detail into your players going to these worlds, into these places. And they're going to spend a lot of time in this Feywild. If you're bored with your current storyline or your current world, because simply, you're just bored. It's too simple. It's too familiar. Change it up and say, hey guys, our campaign arc and story is going to go into the Avernus for a little while. When you get this new Feywild book, if you're going to buy it, our story is going to go into the Feywild. You've been dealing with brownies and fey folk and fairy creatures and druid groves and whatnot, and you go into this druid grove and you get teleported to this new world. We're going to spend some time here. So if you're bored with your current world, this offers both players something new and exciting because it's very unfamiliar. They don't know how the rules work. They don't know how their magic is going to work. They don't know if every time they cast a spell, they need to roll on the wild magic chart. That adds a level of, yes, it's unpredictable. It can be unwieldy, but it adds a level of excitement. For you as the DM, new planes, new worlds with new mechanics, new monsters, things that are, mind flayers that have hit points equivalent to giants. Giant mind flayers. You know what I mean? Like, you can kind of mishmash and just add all these different traits and elements and kind of make your own and build your own monster. I'm going to give undead traits, right? And immunity to all these conditions and all these different things. I'm going to give that to all the orcs. They're not undead, but I'm going to give that to all the orcs in this new world. It starts to give you just some new flavor and some new spice. So that's another bullet point that you can really focus on is if you're bored with your current world and the way things are going and the tried and true, predictable and familiar, send your players somewhere else. Another bullet point. Maybe you're using and introducing other worldly travel and planar travel to shake up the storyline, to just throw a wrench in everything. You've got these forces, these extra planar Gith or something like this coming through. Things that your players are becoming used to the familiar of. I know what goblins can do. I know what orcs can do. I know the big threats are going to be giants and demons and devils and dragons. But now you're introducing aberrations and abominations and things that look like they're half Atyug, half tainted, necrotic, undead treant, while also being vampiric and, you know what I mean? Like ethereal, and there's mechanics involved that they can't even be hurt for the first 2 rounds until you trigger this one key element and so on and so forth. So if you want to shake up the current storyline, again, you're really fishing and feeding into the whole unpredictable element because your players can't really pinpoint how anything works. You, maybe as the DM, don't even know how anything works, but that sort of serendipitous gameplay, that figure it out as you go, can be kind of exciting. It's a lot to wield through and can be hard to wrangle. If you're a new DM, I don't advise having otherworldly travel because now you're juggling mechanics. You're almost juggling a bunch of little mini subsystems. It's not just 5th edition. It's 5th edition as it operates in the Feywild, 5th edition as it operates in the Shadowfell, and so on. So you have to tread lightly here, but it's definitely a good way you can really shake up the storyline because you can kind of just make up shit, right? That's the point of these other worlds. No one knows how it all works. Another really good thing for players, definitely, very player-centric here, is it's a way, other worlds and planes is a way that you can introduce new magic, new schools of magic. Perhaps you want to use Matt Mercer's Dunamancy and whatever Chronomancy, right? Maybe you've got, you've bought some stuff that I've done spotlights on from DM's Guild where you've got these people introduce, different creators are introducing 10th level spells, or they're introducing new schools of magic. Maybe you've invented your own. It's not quite necrotic. It's not quite evocation. So it's not either of necromancy or evocation school of magic, but it's a little bit in the middle. It's always this flash and flare of purple, but it is neither. You're creating a new damage type, right? You're creating a new type of force, sort of force psychic damage. It's a new damage type you're creating, and it has new magic. And you want to be able to offer that to wizards. Like, they might find spell books which have these spells. New worlds offer you an opportunity to do that. Yes, you can say there's a new arcane college in your world, your current material plane. But sometimes, the players can be like, dude, I'm a 10th level wizard. How did I not know that there was this new sort of magic that existed off in the east in this college of wizards? You know what I mean? Or this land of the arcane. How did I not know about that? But when they open up a new portal and that's the sound of going through a new portal. And your players go into this new world where all of the physics and laws of nature and magic are functioning differently. It now makes sense if there's a little trickle effect of this new element of magic. There's a new god, not of divine, not of the arcane, that's trying to step into the pantheon of your material world. And he's trying to introduce this new theme, this new style of magic. Maybe you do that specifically for the players because your warlock is expressing that they're kind of bored. They knew that they were going to be able to just Eldritch Blast, but they're bored with that line of magic. They want to delve into something new. This is a way you can introduce new magic. The planes in other worlds can also help you to introduce new items, new magic items. I've done this to great effect in the Feywild, right? Before 5th edition was officially announcing it, I've used the Feywild before in sort of haggish artifacts or things that the little brownies are trying to sell to you. And they're not very powerful. They're kind of uncommon magic items, but they became some of the most interesting magic items. I made them up myself. So obviously I didn't have to worry about game-breaking things and is it balanced. But they became very interesting things. Trinkets. Things that I was inspired by watching other media, reading books. Of, here's a cool item I read about that this character has in this novel. But it's not 5th edition. It's not Forgotten Realms. It's not D&D-esque. It's just fantasy. It's kind of neat. How can I incorporate and weave that into my own world and make my own magic items? One way to introduce that is there's a merchant in this new world that sells those things. Your PCs go in and they find a sword that has properties that have never been seen in your world before. So definitely the planes offer a really good way, in other worlds, a good way to introduce new magic items and new magic entirely. Interesting NPCs. That's a big one. NPCs are the driving force behind your story and your gameplay. They meet some really quirky characters. Satyrs, faun, things of the Feywild, right? But they meet a Minotaur race that has horns, broad-shouldered, big chest, giant 9-foot, bullish-looking things. But I'm now weaving it a little bit through something from Warhammer Fantasy. And these guys are necrotic as well. They're evil. They look more like the Doom Bulls from Warhammer Fantasy lore. So this is very different than the Boros, Legion of Ravnica, or regular Minotaurs in your world. These guys are hateful, necrotic things of power, and they all deal psychic damage. Right? They're vastly, more intelligent and tactical. They wear full plate armor. You now have a new monster group that's coming into the world. And maybe there's quest givers here. There's some new interesting NPCs, things that allow you to flip through independent third-party content monster books and say, here, you meet this thing. And your players are kind of like, I don't know what that is, but it's kind of neat. I don't know what their capabilities are. Getting away from what's predictable adds a lot of interest and value in your gameplay. So adding in new worlds and using other planes definitely affords you an opportunity to create some interesting NPCs. And then the last point is, by introducing new planes and otherworldly travel, you kind of can create a new middle road, if you will. A place for PCs to hide and lay low for a little while, because the various machinations of the villains and the people that are at war with each other and the battles and all the horrible things happening in your world, they don't apply to this new world. They're not even on the new world, right? How many times do you see something where the one empire that survived, I think this happened in Forgotten Realms, They only survive the cataclysm, the catastrophe, the thing that ended 99% of the world, right? The I Am Legend World War Z thing, right? Some plague killed all of the population of this current world, but the only people that survived with this was the civilization that teleported their city to another world, right? Those other worlds offer these little pockets where your PCs can hide out until they're able to gather their resources, gather their senses, figure out their next course of action. They're immune to the cause and effect and all the consequences of what's going on in this world because they're hiding away in this little pocket realm. Maybe you use it as a middle road to go from A to B. There's destination point over here. The PCs are over here. But in the middle is horrible territory, and the PCs don't know how to get from A to B without dealing with everything in the middle, right? There's a rampaging horde of humanoids that are in the middle, and the PCs don't know any other way around it, right? They're low level. But maybe they find some little portal that lets them kind of have a back door. You know, the portal allows them to go from A directly to B via a different route, a route that cannot be seen. So they can also use that route as ambush, as a surprise. Everyone in B thinks the PCs are never going to be here. You know, the enemies that are sitting off in City B. The villain is sitting there. The PCs will never get to me because my forces are between me and them. But all of a sudden, through using other worlds, planar travel, they just arrive on the backside of B. So you can use planes and other worlds, sort of like traveling through the astral plane, as a means of actual travel. Like a tunnel, if you will, that bypasses everything in between. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are just 7 ways of things you might think through. Again, inspired by this new release that's going to be coming up in a couple of months here, of a new world book of using the Feywild, whether it's its own self-contained adventure or it's just going to inspire you. It doesn't have to be Feywild. It doesn't have to be anything that's already written. Make your own world, and hopefully these 7 bullet points just give you some things to think through as to what might be the value of using other worlds in your world. That's all I got. I'll see you guys soon.